How much should you pay for a 12-year-old single malt? I think that's a really important and relevant question these days. Whether or not you're buying 12-year-old single malt or not, I think that it's something that everyone should probably consider. So what is a fair price for a quality 12-year-old, perhaps entry-level, standard offering from a good distillery? What about if it's a cask strength 12-year-old? Does it affect it? May or may not be important to you personally. Whether or not you're into cask strength whiskey or not, I think that a craft presentation, a quality put together whiskey should definitely have a little bit of impact there. So what's the most that can be justified? And what factors determine that price? This is not a full bottle, because in my opinion the price for a full bottle of this 12-year-old single malt was too much. So I've got a small bottle, just enough for me to have a look at, have a nose and a sip and get an idea of what it's like. It's a very nice label, isn't it? Funny that Diageo, my camera's boycotting special releases clearly because it won't focus. But Diageo obviously like their fancy labels. This one is probably a little bit more understated than perhaps all of the others we've had for the last 3 years. Very subtle compared to some. And when I say some, I'm talking about things like these and the ones that came the year after that, which were even more out there. So yeah, very expensive whiskey because it's part of the Diageo special releases range for 2023, but we kind of come to expect that now. Not that that's okay, but whether we're buying it or not, and I suspect that a lot of you guys watching this are probably not buying it, because it seems like the enthusiasts at large have had enough of the Diageo special releases, and quite rightly so. But to Diageo's credit, they have done a little good deed, and they've made a lot of these little 200ml bottles available. It's not just the Roseisle that you can get in 200ml, you can get the Talisker, I think the Oban and the Lagavulin, unexpectedly, are all available in 200ml bottles, and it's around about the same price per milliliter. So that's kind of my one nice thing that I'm going to say about Diageo this year. I'm allowed one every year and that's all they get. It almost goes without saying that there will be bad things to say about Diageo in this review, and there will be, but legitimately thank you to Diageo for putting these little 200ml bottles out there at a fair price. It's really appreciated. Me as a whiskey reviewer and just a serious malt enthusiast really like these little bottles on some of the more expensive offerings, because it allows us to try more and learn more and experience the most we can within our budgets. I did also consider the Talisker 200ml bottle and the Lagavulin 12-year-old as well, because that's always a popular one. To be fair, if I was being cynical and using my Whiskey Tube business brain, I probably would have got at least the Lagavulin 12, because I think the Lagavulin 12 from a couple of years ago might still be my most viewed video on YouTube, or at least top 3, but I don't really care about all of that. I care more about putting out content that I care about and things that interest me, and having engagement and conversation with you guys out there that are interested in the same things than I do about the views and the numbers and the clicks and the ad revenue, which, if you're interested, adds up to probably a bit less than £1 a day. It is a reality that I'm never going to be able to give up the day job doing this, but that's not what it's about. But yeah, I did consider getting the Talisker and the Lagavulin in the 200ml bottles, decided against it, because to be honest, the prices of the full bottles on these releases have kind of made me lose interest, and I'd rather spend my time reviewing something that I can be a little bit more positive about. So I decided to do this one. I decided to go for the Roseisle, and As you might guess, that's because Roseisle is a brand new distillery. This is their first ever inaugural release. And as you know, I've been doing a lot of the new distillery new releases lately. As for the details for this Roseisle, we have an age statement, which is nice with Diageo special releases, because even some of the very expensive ones don't have that anymore. This is a 12-year-old whiskey. We're told that it is natural cask strength and that it's distilled, matured and bottled in Scotland. And that's about it. Obviously there probably are some more details on the label of the full bottle because it's a bigger bottle with a bigger label. But we don't have any more than that to go on from this 200ml bottle. If you have a little look online and do some sleuthing, some detective work, you'll see that some people do think that this is natural colour and non-chill filtered. It would make sense that this would be non-chill filtered because it is cask strength, but that does not guarantee, just because something's cask strength does not mean that it's been filtered for cosmetic purposes. It happens, but the disappointing thing for me is that Diageo don't feel the need to tell us. Whether it is or not, Diageo with their special releases range, they still don't think that natural colouring and non-chill filtration are important enough to tell the consumer. Clearly, to Diageo, whiskey is just a means to inebriation. And us enthusiasts need to stop asking these silly questions. Hopefully that's not the case. But by not telling us, that's kind of the impression of what I imagine Diageo are thinking. But yeah, this is meant to be a special release. It's part of the special releases range. So, is it special? Is it special enough for a quality presentation? In my opinion, Diageo don't want to tell us either way whether it is or not, because if they do tell us, if they make any statement, then it's going to have us raising the same questions about their other whiskies, especially their other expensive whiskies, things like Lagavulin 16, and it's going to raise some uncomfortable questions which Diageo aren't going to want to answer. In my opinion, the reason why Diageo don't give us any guarantees on the presentation on things like this, which probably are craft, is because it's just a conversation that they don't want to engage in. That's enough of that though. This is a Roseisle and it's a very prominent distillery in the Diageo portfolio, and it is a whiskey that we are rightly excited about if we are. And in a way, I was a little bit conflicted with this one, so obviously I wanted to try the new distillery, but being Roseisle, it's a little bit silly in a way to want to try a Roseisle inaugural release to see what it's like, because Roseisle by its definition can be anything. Roseisle, if you don't know, it's a newish distillery set up about 12 years ago by Diageo, the whiskey giant, and the purpose of Roseisle was that they want to be able to make any style of whiskey from the entirety of Scotland or the Diageo portfolio. So if there's a gap in production, if any of the other distilleries go down or they need extra production on the quick, they're ready, they can make that style of whiskey and fill in for any of the others. So a little bit silly to try this when, if you believe what Diageo is saying, it's going to be a real chameleon malt and we're going to get some Roseisles over the next few years that should technically be very, very different to each other. Also, when we're talking about releases and availability in batches, it's a little bit silly that this one is part of the Diageo special releases range, because as we know, the special releases in theory are limited editions, and it's a bit silly for the inaugural Roseisle release to be so limited edition, because Roseisle is a whiskey factory. It's a huge distillery with a huge output. Would have been nice if they'd have made this in quantities that allow everyone to try it, not this limited special release which sold out very quickly, because high output, high capacity of kind of the entire point of Roseisle's existence. And that high output, that high capacity really makes sense when you consider what Diageo are. Diageo are a blending company. They always have been. They were a blending company in the early 19th century when they were starting out in that Kilmarnock grocer's shop. They were a blending company when they bought Cardew. That was their first distillery in the portfolio. And it was bought to supply whiskey to go into blends. And they're still a blend company. The only difference now is that Diageo are a blended whisky company that's decided that premiumization, in their own words, can be very profitable. And you see this word premiumization a lot if you look at the Diageo kind of business reports, less of the marketing, and you look at the fiscal side of the reports that come out of Diageo, what they're saying to kind of impress their current and future investors. You see this word premiumization of Scotch whisky coming up again and again. So what does premiumization mean? We would like to think that it means raising the quality, making the quality more premium. But when you look at what Diageo do and how they're really lagging behind a lot of the independent bottlers and the new distilleries that are coming out with their admittedly very young but very high quality craft presented whiskies, that doesn't seem to be the case. I think, in my opinion, Diageo's version of premiumization seems to just be raising the prices and finding a way to get people to continue paying them. So, trying to keep on track with the whisky. Roseisle was founded in 2010, and as I said before, it is founded as a fully configurable distillery capable of filling in for any other Diageo distillery by replicating that distillery style. Roseisle is a very large distillery with 14 washbacks and 14 stills. Roseisle is located in Elgin, close to the existing Diageo maltings. So this design spec of Roseisle as being able to take over from any of the other distilleries, I think it would be justified to be a little bit worried if you work at any of the other Diageo distilleries that this distillery is coming online that can do your job. It can do your job and eat your dinner, so to speak. But distilleries replicating other distillery style is nothing new. Even when you're talking about distilleries inside the same company, you have to consider, after all, that Brora itself was reopened in 1969 with the purpose of copying Caol Ila's style during a period of drought on Islay. A lot of people aren't aware of that, but they probably should be, especially when you're considering paying thousands of pounds for a Brora, especially the early expensive batches of Brora, are really knockoff Caol Ila's. But yeah, that's where we are with Roseisle. A lot of people are calling it Glenmordor, both because of what it's set up to do and the way it looks. It's a very modern building. If you do a little Google, you'll see what I mean. But I am genuinely excited to try this stuff. I'm excited to try any new distillery, and the fact that this is Diageo's Death Star, as some people are calling it, capable of destroying other distilleries and taking over in the blink of an eye. It's an interesting distillery, and it's something that I would probably recommend, if you're interested in it too, having a look to see if you can find one of these 200ml bottles. So let's get some in the glass, and I'll tell you what I think. Natural colour? Maybe. So first things first, very fruit driven on the nose, very fresh and fruity, appley, very apple driven profile on the nose. Orchard fruits, mix of red and green apples, more towards the fresh, juicy, sharp green apples. And a little bit of a dryness in there as well, a little bit of a tart apple note and a little bit of a bitter tannic. I realise they're different things, but a little bit of tannic apple peel in there as well. And some dry, papery woodiness on the nose. And that woodiness on the nose, it is a dry woodiness, and it's kind of a fresh balsa wood, craft shop, like sanding softwood woodiness, rather than the luxurious French polished oak woodiness that we sometimes look for in whiskies. Quite floral, vanilla custard, a little bit of a beery note mixed in with the gristiness on the nose, a slight yeasty beer note, a little bit of a sour beer note. Sid, I know that one's probably going to be popular with you. Very floral though, as I said, a little bit of a Turkish delight, floral and fruity note. Gristy, cereal, a little bit of a shortbread biscuitiness as well. So a nice, complex, full, distillate-driven quality nose. Let's see how it tastes. I must say that, as I said, I was excited to try this, and I'm really interested in it. I was really looking forward to it, but I'm a little bit annoyed at how good it is. And I feel that way a little bit with any Diageo special release, because they're all so overpriced that you kind of want them to be crap so that you can justify not paying the price. Happy and sad in equal measures with this one, saying that the nose is good and the palate is actually better. The palate is very good. It's a very bold and juicy, sharp, fruity, fizzy, effervescent, beautiful malt-driven profile on the palate. And again, on the palate, it's all about those apples, a very orchard fruits, typical classic Speyside appley profile. Apples and apple peel on the early arrival. Fruity, really nice fruity maltiness, similar to a delicate fruity Speyside malt, with that full-bodied orchard fruit malt left to really express itself properly by those refill casks. There is a little bit of pleasant oakiness on the palate of this one, but really not too much cask. I think that the way they've made this is very wise. It's a stunning and really enjoyable inaugural release for any hardcore malt heads out there. It's got some really nice tart and slightly tannic notes on the palate, similar to what I had on the nose, as well as a growing grassiness. And those nice grassy notes really offset the fruitiness really well. Really good complexity, really good balance. Those green apples and apple peel notes coming back. It's sharp and dry in perfect balance and equal measure, getting a little bit of a slightly bready maltiness coming through on the late palate as well. Reminds me a little bit of like a lemon drizzle cake. As for the finish, gonna have one more sip. Beautiful intense sourness on the palate, almost a puckering sourness, and that's something that I really enjoy. As for the finish, quite long, with lots of sharp appley malt and a little bit of light oak, a little bit of grassy, slight stewed tea tannin note. Really, really pleasant. And I have to say that it does remind me a little bit of that Singleton release that we had quite a while ago now. That was a 19-year-old... What was that? It's a Glendullan, right? I think it was a Glendullan. But 19-year-old Singleton finished in cognac casks, I think. And this does remind me of that style, because it's got that... This sounds negative, it's always going to sound negative, but it's got that blend filler profile. But blend fillers can be fantastic whiskies, especially if you give one of these standard whiskies time to mature slowly in a refill cask. They can become really something quite special for those who've got a bit of experience with whiskey and they know what they're looking for and they appreciate the finer points of long-term matured malt spirit in a not too active, not too dominant cask. And I think that this Roseisle 12 and that 19-year-old Singleton from a couple of years ago, they both share that. They've both got that juicy maltiness and the grassiness. It's just quality malt whiskey done slowly. So Roseisle, what does Roseisle taste like? In this example, it's very, very good whiskey. I think that this combination of quality spirit in some refill casks is a particular favourite of mine. And I think it was very wise of Diageo to use those refill casks on this inaugural release, with that maltiness really highlighting the barley and the distillate. It's also quite Speyside. It's got obviously no immaturity, and it's perfect to drink at the full cask strength, and it is very, very good. But really, as we knew with this one, as we kind of expected and predicted, the quality is never going to be, well, the quality is not the problem on this one. It is on some Diageo special releases, but on this one it's not. The quality is not the problem, the price is. And while this is very good whiskey, it's no different to several dozen other blend filler style, kind of standard whiskies. And by that, I mean whiskies that aren't really unusual or extreme in any way. I think that if you take some good spirit and some good refill bourbon casks and do this with the other Singletons or a Deanston or a Blair Athol, or Bruichladdich is another example of a quality spirit that doesn't really rely on crutches or cask. Well, standard Bruichladdich don't rely on cask finishes or peat, although some Bruichladdich products do that. Or perhaps something like a Roseisle. There are lots of distilleries that are capable of making a whiskey of this profile, and if given a good cask and enough time, they would be just as good. So that kind of leads us on to the question of why is this stuff so bloody expensive? So one argument would be that there's not a lot of this around, so you kind of have to have a high price to make up for the scarcity. But really that doesn't help me, that doesn't really satisfy me. In fact, in recent years I've kind of been deliberately avoiding rare whiskey like your Springbanks and your Eagle Rare 17s and your Pappies and your age statement Japanese whiskies. Even when I've had the opportunity to buy those whiskies, I've not bothered. And especially with the Springbanks and the Kilkerrans, I've got a lot of those whiskies on my shelf that I've had for quite a while, and I've deliberately not reviewed them because I don't want to add into the hype. In my opinion, drinking hard to buy whiskey doesn't make you special. And especially when that scarcity doesn't translate to quality, I don't want to be part of that chain hyping that stuff up. And in the case of Roseisle, which we know is a whiskey mega factory, scarcity doesn't really apply to this, or it shouldn't apply to this. Implying that this stuff has some sort of scarcity is really insulting to our intelligence. So another argument for this stuff might be that the high price is because it's an inaugural release. It's the first batch, it's going to be something that a lot of people buy, and sadly, and this really does make me a little bit sad, a lot of people are going to be buying this and they're going to stick it on a shelf or in a cabinet, possibly a dehumidified space, a little whiskey vault, and they're never going to drink it, they're never even going to consider opening it, because people are going to buy this stuff because they think that it's going to be an investment. But you guys know me, you know that I'm not about that. I don't buy my whiskey to invest or flip. I think that it's an absolute scourge on the whiskey community. And again, arguing that this stuff needs to be expensive because the inaugural release doesn't help me. I've had a lot of inaugural releases from distilleries over the last few months. So we've got the Loch-Leet, that wasn't an inaugural release, but it was an early one. Toravaig, that was almost an inaugural release. But very recently we obviously had the Heroic from the Isle of Harris. That was an inaugural release, even though it was batch 7 of that first batch. Kind of makes sense. But with all of these inaugural releases, if you're the kind of person that opens your whiskey and actually does what you're meant to with it, and that's drinking it and enjoying it, all you're left with once that bottle is empty is this. This and your memories and the experience and your enjoyment, and it's all the same whether it's the first batch or the second batch or the millionth batch. You're left with a label and the level of enjoyment you got from the level of quality in the bottle. And in my opinion, whether or not it's the inaugural release, rarely has any sort of tie or correlation to the quality. If you're buying your whiskey to flip, then yeah, maybe it makes sense that this stuff should be expensive because you're going to get a better return on this, I guess, than the second batch. But these days there's going to be thousands of people out there buying thousands of bottles of every single rare release. So I would argue that you're probably unlikely to be buying a bottle anytime in the last 10 years and going forward that's ever going to be a significant return on investment. And you're probably better off, if you are considering being a whiskey flipper, just investing your money directly somewhere. In my humble opinion, I think that Diageo are doing something else with this one, and the reason why this one is so expensive, I think I paid about £38 for this, which is probably about an average sum of money for any quality bottle of whiskey these days, if you're talking about 700ml bottles, but this is only a 200. So this is quite expensive. Obviously I saved some money by being able to buy the 200, and I do really like that Diageo did that, but it's expensive juice. And in my opinion, the reason why Diageo have done that is something else. I think that the special release whiskies are not designed to be sold. I think that the special releases from Diageo, they really exist outside of that world of profits and sales. I think that they are halo products, which can probably explain both why they're priced so high and why Diageo don't seem to care when these special releases sit on a shelf gathering dust for 2, 3 or more years not being sold. If you're into cars, or if you know about cars at all, I think that these special releases from Diageo, they're kind of like a Bugatti. So Bugatti is kind of a luxury halo product brand owned by Volkswagen, and Bugattis, they're sold in very, very limited numbers. They're often made at a loss. They're only sold to those that Volkswagen want to have them, and they're produced at a rate that creates this artificial scarcity. Sound familiar? In my opinion, so it is with the Diageo special releases. They exist to be seen and talked about by people like us and people in whiskey shops, people that are going in that are perhaps at the start of their whiskey journey and they're looking to spend £25 and they're looking up at that pedestal, looking at that bottle of Mortlach with the knight in armour on the bottle with the £250 price tag silently rotating at the top of that ivory tower. The purpose of that bottle of £250 Mortlach is not to be sold, it's to be seen and talked about and to make an impression and say something about what whiskey is and what Diageo want whiskey to be. They exist to advertise the brand, to normalise high prices and make people familiar with these increasingly common 3-digit price tags and to break that association that a lot of us have between high prices and quality. And the perfect example of that is that Mortlach NAS bottling that's been in the special releases range for the last 2 years or more. So us whiskey enthusiasts, us whiskey geeks, we get angry about things like that Mortlach. Not all for bad reasons. We get angry because Mortlach is a distillery that a lot of us like. Rene at Sourleg Whisky, he really liked his Mortlach, and for good reason. It's a really ballsy, hearty, meaty distillate of substance. But us whiskey enthusiasts, we get angry because a no-age statement whiskey is being sold, or at least advertised, for £250. But in my opinion, I think that the point for Diageo is to show people, even it's kind of the other way around. It's not that this NAS whiskey is £250. The point for Diageo is saying that this £250 whiskey doesn't need an age statement. And by that logic, it's okay that I know you normally like the Talisker 10-year-old, but this Talisker Sky is basically the same thing. It doesn't have an age statement, but you don't need that. Even the Mortlach doesn't need an age statement. It's less about selling expensive whiskey and more about teaching us what whiskey is. But it's our job to call them out on this, and it's our job to not be fooled by them. It may almost be cliche at this point to call out the Diageo special releases, but I do really think that it's important that we stay grounded and we realise that £120, because that is the price tag for a full bottle of this, is not the correct price for a 12-year-old cask strength whisky. If £120 was the proper price for a bottle of 12-year-old whisky, what would the proper price be for an 18-year-old whisky? No. I think that this kind of mismatch between price and quality and integrity and what you actually get out of the bottle really kind of hit home to me, because I kept thinking that this Roseisle, as good as it is and as much as I enjoy it, and I really, really do, it kept reminding me of something. The flavours that I was getting, especially the really bright, sharp appliness and the dry grassiness and the slightly dry oak, it really kept reminding me of something that I'd had recently, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And then I realised what it was reminding me of, something that I've had very recently, really reminded me of the Loch Lomond, and this isn't a standard Loch Lomond, it's the distillery edition number 3, the extra long fermentation one. And I'm not saying that this stuff has all of the fruit bomb estery notes that this had. This stuff had 3-week-long fermentation, which gave it a pretty unique profile. It gave it some flavours that you can only get by going through that long, expensive process. But both of these whiskies had that extreme, sharp, apple, spirit-driven profile. They're both very apple-driven. They're both cask strength. They're similar ages, 12 and 10. They're both from refill casks. They're both very, very good whisky. I'm not arguing that at all. But this one is £120 a bottle. This one is £70 a bottle. And in my opinion, this one is a little bit better. I think that this one, I've A/B compared these two. This one, it's got a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more complexity, a little bit more, well, a lot more fruitiness in the profile, but they're both very, very good whiskies. Congratulations, Diageo, on producing a very good inaugural release, but no, this is not a £120 whisky. So over to you guys. Thanks for anyone that's kept with me through this entire thing, because I realise it's going to be a very long one. Let me know what you think is a fair price for a 12-year-old whisky. £120? Do you think this stuff is overpriced? Because it is very good. In my opinion, the problem is that you can get this very, very high level of quality for a much lower price. And if I can, I will. But let me know what you think. If you've tried this one, I'd love to hear what you think. And what do you think about this whole pricing fiasco? Thanks for sticking with me, guys. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come here and have a little natter about whiskey. And if you do decide to leave a comment and get in touch with me, then thank you all the more. Cheers.